Good afternoon. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about something that affects all of us, but you probably haven't heard the terms. So I run something called the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society. And that institute looks at populations as well as themes. So it looks at what's going on in the LGBTQ community, what's going on in the Black community, what's going on with people with disabilities, religion, age, poverty. You get the drift. And so the idea is that what's going on in terms of how we marginalize people. And we had a conference last year, and I want to sort of look at what are the themes that are central to all of these communities, and in fact central to all of us. And the theme is one of othering and belonging. Othering and belonging. Who belongs and who's othered? And I'm sure all of us have had an experience where we walked in a place or we're in a place where we felt like, these are my people, I belong here. I'm sure all of us have had an experience where we've been someplace and it's like, it feels weird, this is not my place. What I want to suggest to you is that the problem, both in the 21st century and the problem closely connected to how we think about spirituality, tech world, our lives, is deeply grounded in the concept of othering and belonging. Now, it's not just a concept. It's much more than that. And it's not something that we just carry in our head. We actually structure neighborhoods to say, this neighborhood belongs to these people and not to those people. This school belongs to these people and not to those people. How does this relate to spirituality? Well, first of all, I would suggest from a deep perspective, there is no other. There is no other. And to the extent that we live our lives as if there is another, we not only deny that person that we target, we actually deny ourselves. We're complex people. We have different parts of ourselves. And the question is, can we actually hold on to all of those parts? Can we create institutions and societies that reflect that? And the reason that othering and belonging is so important is that it's grounded in, on one hand, a sense of who we might be, but it's also grounded in a sense of fear. So the other are those that we fear. We're in a political climate right now where there's a lot of othering going on, where we're told constantly, you should hate this group. They're not like you. These are your people, those are not your people. So in this session, you've heard the term spirituality a lot. And I want to actually give you my concept, my definition of spirituality, so that we have some common ground to talk from. And I think of spirituality, and not just think of it, is a deep sense of a lived practice of inter- and intra-relatedness, where we recognize that we're related to each other, where we recognize that we are part of each other. Now, note I said we recognize it, because I believe we are related. As James Baldwin says, whether we like it or not. In fact, he goes on to say, some of my countrymen find the fact that we're related inconvenient and even unfair. But we can do nothing about it. I would take James Baldwin's assertion and change it a little bit and say, yes, we can do something about it. We can acknowledge it. We can live it. We can reflect it. I want to say a little bit more about spirituality and how it connects to otherness and belonging. Many of you probably have a practice, and there's many things that could be called spirituality. In fact, one might say, is there anything that's not about spirituality? But there are ways of approaching it. We can actually approach spirituality as if we are completely separate. That spirituality becomes about me It becomes about my comfort, my consciousness, my enlightenment. And I would like to call that spiritual narcissism. That if we're deeply related, then it's a myth to think that I can save myself. And many of you remember in the midst of the 90s, there was the superconsciousness. There was the notion that if you meditate hard enough, if you chant long enough, if you do enough yoga, you could know everything about everything. And I think of that as an extension of the hubris of the West. The need to actually have control and knowledge of everything. Now think about the major, at least Western religions. Judaism, Christianity, Islam. They're called faith-based religions. Why are they called faith-based religions? In part because they say there's something we cannot know, but we still have to act from a place of faith. What we're finding in the mind science, which we didn't know much about 40 years ago, is that the mind is huge. And the unconscious is the largest part of the mind, and the conscious is quite small. Very small, teeny. In fact, some social scientists say the consciousness is a myth. It doesn't even exist. But whether you believe it exists or it's quite small, it's clear the consciousness will never know everything. And so what I want to suggest to you is spirituality also requires some acts of faith, some humility, to say we live in a world where we don't know everything. Even with the internet, we don't know everything. We can't know everything, and yet we live in a world. So what's the opposite of spirituality? And how do we get into this mess we're in? I want to talk about 4 separations. That is, people separated from the universe and nature. That's one separation. Another separation is people separated from each other. The third separation is the mind separated from the body and the spirit. And the final separation is people separated from institutions, structures, and systems. And when you have all those separations going on, you're experiencing what I would call ontological death. You're actually in a very fearful place, because when you're separate from things, not only do you not have the proper relationship, the relationship becomes one of dominance. How do I dominate nature? Nature is kind of scary, especially when she's not under my control. So most of us like parks. But you read children's stories and you know that many of us don't like forests. Why is that? Parks are orderly. They're under human control. I put a tree there and it stays there. I put a plant there and it stays there. And if it doesn't, I go back next week and cut it. Get back in your place. The forest is unruly. The forest is full of mystery. The forest can't be controlled, and therefore it evokes fear. When we separate from something, our response is fear. And what we've done in Western society is have all of these separations. And to manage our separations, we need power over and dominance. Now, Rhonda was just here and talked to you about race. And I'm talking about otherness. So race is one expression of otherness in our society, but so is disability. So is someone who's supposed to be different forms of sexuality. So is a different religion. And when we have those differences, our response is to dominate and control, to make them into parks. Where there's the other, there's fear. Where there's the self, there's trembling. The self cuts itself off from the other and then need to dominate. And that smuggles itself in, not just into politics, but it smuggles itself into religion and spirituality. So sometimes we say we have to first fix the inner, and then we'll fix the outer. And Don Cherry, who's a jazz musician, responded to that. He said, the outside is not, the inside is too. And what I understand him to be saying is that this notion of inside and outside is a myth as well. That there is no outside or inside, or they're both the same. They're in a constant interaction. When we talk about belonging, we're talking about living and experiencing our connectedness. And it's not easy, because when we're connected to things, there is anxiety and fear. We both need each other and fear each other at the same time. And we have strategies to deal with that. One is to totally withdraw and disengage. And so we see a lot of spiritual practices focused on detachment. Don't let anything affect you. Detach. Others is to totally merge. We're all the same. And I want to suggest life is actually a little messier than that. And life is somewhat scary. But can we lean into that? Can we love into that? Can we connect with that in a conscious way? Not in a conscious way, meaning we understand everything, but understand that life is full of uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, there are constantly things emerging. The king says, love without power is sentimental. Power without love is tyranny. So we have to bring these things together. So when we talk about love, we're not talking about just, again, a thought or emotional process. We're talking about how do we actually live into our connectedness and acknowledge that, yes, it's scary, but we're connected. How do we draw a circle of human concern so that no human, and we might even go further and say no life is outside that circle? How do we draw a circle where no life is outside that circle? And I gave a talk about this some time ago, and someone said, what about the Koch brothers? We can oppose what they're doing. I do oppose what they're doing, but we have to hold on to their humanity. So these are challenging things. And I want to suggest that saying that we're related is just the beginning of the discussion, not the end. This is partially a conference where people in the tech world come together. And we've all heard of this thing that's supposed to connect us called the internet. Acknowledging that we're interrelated and intra-related is the beginning of the discussion, because a master and slave are connected. But certainly we're not talking about that. So we have to talk about what are the right kinds of relationships? What are the right kinds of connectivity? And in a large, complex society, a lot of the ways we're connected are through institutions and structures. So what kind of institutions and structures begin to connect us in the right way, that support life, that grows life, that acknowledges life in all of its complexity? Now, we're here in the Bay Area, and one of the things that we come up on a lot is that there's some people we don't really want to be connected with. This is supposed to be a very liberal area, but there's some people we don't want to be connected with. Sometimes those people might be called homeless. Sometimes those people might be called ex-offenders. Sometimes those people might be called poor. We like being connected to movie stars, to famous people, to basketball players. But there are other people we don't like to be connected with. And in doing so, we cut ourselves off from their humanity and thereby cut ourselves off from our humanity. I only have a little time left, so I want to make a couple of points. Structures are never neutral. They're always doing some work. So how do we organize structures to support and celebrate and facilitate our connectivity, our belongingness? And in doing so, that means those structures have to be open to be revised, because as new people come in, they bring with them their lives, their stories, their dreams. How do we do that? How do we think of technology that begins to not just connect people virtually, but connect people actually? These are challenging things. I want to suggest the challenge of the 21st century is the problem of othering. And unless we get it right, not only will people suffer, but the planet will suffer. We're connected not just to each other, but to the planet. We don't have to like the Koch brothers, but we have to hold on to their humanity. And I want to end by saying something a little controversial. From a spiritual perspective, it's never right to hate someone, and it's never wrong to love someone. And I don't mean it's never wrong to hate someone and never wrong to love someone based on your friends. That is, I hate that homeless person who spit on my shoes, but I love my wife. It's never right to hate someone. It's never wrong to love someone. It doesn't mean I like the situation. But if we are going to have a society, a world, where we connect and recognize our shared humanity, our interconnectedness, our interconnectedness, if we're going to live into a world where we can fully live without having to dominate and control, we must embrace and lean toward a deep interconnection where there is no otherness. There's only belonging. Thank you. Deny ourselves. We're complex people. We have different parts of ourselves. And the question is, can we actually hold on to all of those parts? Can we create institutions and societies that reflect that? And the reason that othering and belonging is so important is that it's grounded in, on one hand, a sense of who we might be, but it's also grounded in a sense of fear. So the other are neighborhoods, to say this neighborhood belongs to these people and not to those people. This school belongs to these people and not to those people. How does this relate to spirituality? Well, first of all, I would suggest from a deep perspective, there is no other. There is no other. And to the extent that we live our lives as if there is another, we not only deny that person that we target, where we felt like, these are my people, I belong here. I'm sure all of us have had an experience where we've been someplace and it's like, it feels weird, this is not my place. What I want to suggest to you is that the problem, both in the 21st century and the problem closely connected to how we think about spirituality, tech world, our lives, is deeply grounded in the concept of othering and belonging. Now, it's not just a concept, it's much more than that. And it's not something that we just carry in our head. We actually structure. Good afternoon. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about something that affects all of us, but you probably haven't heard the terms. So I run something called the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society. And that institute looks at populations as well as themes. So it looks at what's going on in the LGBTQ community, what's going on in the black community, what's going on with people with disabilities, religion, age, poverty. You get the drift. And so the idea is that what's going on in terms of how we marginalize people. And we had a conference last year, and I want to sort of look at what are the themes that are central to all of these communities, and in fact central to all of us. And the theme is one of othering and belonging. Othering and belonging. Who belongs and who's othered? And I'm sure all of us have had an experience where we walked in a place or we're in a place